Afternoon, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Afternoon.
Welcome. Just waiting for a couple more to join, and then we'll be kicking off.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there. Is that share coming through all right, Colin?
Yep, I can see it on my side.
Right. Afternoon for those of you just joined. We're just waiting a couple of minutes and then we'll be kicking off shortly. Right, how are we doing on numbers there, Mel? Are we almost
Very
as
good.
expected?
I think just cognizant of everyone's time, we can kick off.
Yeah, that's
We'd
great.
like to.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Welcome to our Bits and Bytes. Oh, sorry, guys, if you wouldn't mind just muting yourselves. Welcome to our Bits and Bytes on artificial intelligence. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Timperley. I'm the Chief Executive at the Turrito Group of Companies. Joining me today is Colin Thornton, who's our Chief Commercial Officer. He's connecting in from our Cape Town offices. So before we begin, I'd actually just like to get a quick sense of everyone's experience to generative AI. So by a show of virtual hands, you can just click the hand raise button at the top. We're going to start with the early adopters. So who in the room is already building custom artificial intelligence technology in their businesses? So, proper custom stuff specifically for your organization. Just raise your hand. There might not be any because this is really early days, so don't feel bad if you're not. Okay, we do have hands being raised. Excellent. Then if you could raise your hands if you're not at the custom level yet, but you are using artificial intelligence on a daily basis to improve productivity in your life or in other departments' lives, et cetera, et cetera. If you guys could raise your hands, so kind of an intermittent usage of artificial intelligence. Great. So as expected, there's more of those hands going up, which is awesome. And then lastly, all those individuals who have very moderate to low exposure to generative artificial intelligence. So you guys are investigating its potential, but you don't have a huge amount of engagement with it. And that'll very likely be the majority of the remainder of the group. So that's brilliant. So there's a nice mix in the room. We do have those really early adopters right through to where the majority of people are, which is kind of experimenting and investigating its potential. So it's something that we know is going to change quite dramatically, and that's the reason why I wanted to understand the room's dynamics, because we predict that within the next 18 months, roughly 70% of our customer base will have some form of custom generative AI deployed within the organization. So that's the rate at which this stuff is changing at the moment. Just for interest's sake, all of the images in this presentation, including this spinning brain that keeps stopping for some reason, all of the images were generated using artificial intelligence, as well as the backgrounds that you see in the back of all of the presenters today as well. So we're going to kick off with injecting intelligence. So we'll be touching quite a bit on Microsoft Copilot specifically during the presentation. Those of you who don't know, Copilot is Microsoft's AI integration using ChatGPT. So there are two flavors. There's just Copilot. It's sometimes called Copilot for Bing. which is pretty much everyone in this room will have access to that if you're consuming Microsoft services. It's available on pretty much all of the licenses. The second one is Copilot for Microsoft 365. So that one plugs into your Microsoft tenant. So any structured or unstructured data that sits in your tenant, so SharePoint, email, Teams, spreadsheets, databases, etc., that'll all be trained in and understood by the artificial intelligence, by Copilot. We want to cover two primary things during the session. So firstly, insights around using artificial intelligence more practically. So we're going to show you actual things that you can do today with a lot of the tools that you will have access to or are looking to get access to. But secondly, some insights around the importance of getting your environment ready for artificial intelligence deployment. So your tenant and environments are equipped to handle and deliver artificial intelligence without the significant risk that it can carry. And one of the things that we found out recently is we heard a story coming out of the United States. There was a business, they wanted to be very early adopters in terms of artificial intelligence. So the CEO approved for 300 licenses across the board to be sent out to the staff, and all of the staff could obviously start playing around with Copilot specifically. And one of the junior analysts in that financial business, a big financial house in the States, she got a hold of her license and really started playing around with it and seeing what it could deliver. And what she found is that if you ask it questions in natural language, it'll obviously deliver back if you're allowed to see it. So she started to get a little bit bold and said, could you deliver me the CEO's payslip and benefits? And lo and behold, a few seconds later, that was delivered straight through to her. She then, in a very short space of time, was able to ask Copilot to deliver the entire payroll of the organization, all of the financial and income statements for the existing year, as well as the agenda notes from their board meetings. Now, fortunately, she was not a malicious employee. She went straight to the leadership team and she said, look, this thing that you've deployed, I've just asked it a couple of questions and it served me this information. And the leadership team immediately shut it down. No doubt they gave her a big promotion or something like that. But they obviously realized that they had opened up a can of worms within their business. And the reality is, when they went and did the investigation, that particular analyst had asked for a higher level of access 6 months before they deployed Copilot. And the IT team had given her the higher level of access, but it negated to ever reduce it back to what it should have been. So with that higher level of access, I mean, she didn't know what to look for or how to look for it. But the reality is, as soon as they enabled Copilot in the environment, Copilot understood where everything was and the context around everything. So just using natural language was able to deliver whatever she was asking for because her credentials matched the credential levels on the Microsoft tenant. And it's an important thing to know when deploying any of these technologies, and specifically around Copilot, is that it will honor the Microsoft tenant permissions that are custom configured to your environment. So there's no separate configuration of those permissions in the AI itself. It is your Microsoft permissions that it will listen to and it will honor. So I'm going to quickly hand over to Colin, who's going to be giving us a little bit of insight on generative AI, and then we're going to jump straight into the live demos. Over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Brian. And just we jump straight in and we do move these presentations along at a hell of a pace, and that is deliberate. We have a very short period, which is we respect everyone's time. It is over lunchtime, and by now you guys should have received those vouchers. So hopefully you're enjoying food at the same time while listening to us. But I just want to sort of point that out, like we do rush through these things, and at the end we will get plenty of time to ask questions or go through things if you have the time to hang around. If you don't have the time to hang around, feel free to jump off at exactly 12:30. Quickly, and again, this is really about sort of applicable uses of AI in business today, so I don't want to spend too much time on the history or the background, but for me, the picture that you guys are looking at right now was a crossing of the Rubicon between machine learning and sort of business automation, robotic process automation, all of the stuff that you guys have probably read about before, and what we now call sort of modern generative AI. This picture, for those of you who don't know, was entered into the Sony worldwide photo competition, which is a very renowned, very respected, huge competition. Professional photographers from around the world enter this competition. In 2022, a well-known German photographer entered this photograph, which was meant to look like a very old-fashioned photo made using chemicals and darkrooms, and which is a style that he's known for, and it won one of the most hotly contested categories. When they were going to announce the winners, he then said, I made this using AI, and I was proving a point. You guys need to be more careful around how you judge these things, because AI is going to change our industry. And he made a huge point. I love photography, which is why I'm using this as an example, but he made a huge point, and a lot of people stood up and took notice, and now the way they judge photography competitions has changed fundamentally. For me, it was the moment when AI changed from being something that just helped you do processes and admin more quickly into something that could actually be creative. It's fooling you right now, but it's what AI is generating, whether you're using ChatGPT or Midjourney or Copilot. It's actually doing stuff that looks creative. It looks like something that 5 years ago people thought wasn't possible. 5 years ago, people were going, look, it can fill in HR forms faster than a human being, but you still need a human being to make the form or to write the content for our monthly newsletter. Nowadays, we're all taking it for granted that you can use ChatGPT to write the intro to a monthly newsletter. So that's for me a crossing over point 2022. But to jump back a little bit further, Brian, if you would go to the next slide, please. The groundwork started in 2016 when IBM and a bunch of the big companies were building what they called AI at the time. It's actually a shadow of what it is today, but it's how the sort of most recent part of this journey started. And in 2016, there was a program called AlphaGo, which beat a human being in a game called Go, which is an ancient Chinese game, and it's way more complicated than chess. So, computers beating humans in chess is what a lot of people read about, but a real landmark was when a computer beat a human in Go, because there are apparently billions of, I've never played it in my life, I wouldn't even recognize the game, but apparently there's billions of permutations, and this was the first time a computer program beat a human being. In 2017, they created a new version called AlphaZero, and it taught itself how to play Go. AlphaGo taught AlphaZero how to play Go, and AlphaZero could then beat AlphaGo in a couple of hours, teaching itself and beating the old program in a couple of hours. When they tried to do that, it took a year or two, because what they were, and this was a big learning, and the biggest summary of the slide, is when humans taught AIs how to do something, whether it was a process or learning how to play chess or Go, it was way less efficient than when an AI taught an AI how to play a game or perform a task. AI approached it in different ways. It had different strategies. It did things that no one had ever thought of, and that made a huge difference to the way they created these things going forward. In 2018, it could teach itself any game in the world and beat any human. Chess, Go, whatever other people came up with, maze games. It was an unbeatable computer player, and it had been taught entirely by computers. In 2020, AlphaFold, which is now an iteration of all of these AIs, they used it to work on the what was called the protein fold problem, which is that if you can understand and map proteins that interact or in the human body and that create enzymes and all of that sort of stuff, it's the first step in the process to really understanding things like diseases. So there's a huge hope that understanding how every single protein fold works and what it looks like could one day lead to the cure for cancer, as an example. Previously, 10 years ago, which is not a long time ago, people thought that it wasn't possible to actually map all of these proteins. There's hundreds of millions of possibilities and tons of proteins. Again, I'm not a biochemist, but I've read a lot about this. And within a year, AlphaFold solved all the problems, mapped all the proteins, and now scientists can actually work on what that means and how we can apply it and how we can make medicine. So like I said earlier, the biggest takeaway from all of this is that AI teaching AI was much faster than humans teaching AI. And that leads to another funny outcome, which is that what AI developers call the black box concept. No one knows nowadays what's inside that black box. It used to be that a coder would make a module and the module would plug onto another module and together they'd be compiled into a program. And ultimately everyone would know what all the modules looked like. You could reverse compile it. That stopped a couple of years ago. The engines that are being used for AI nowadays are a black box. No one knows what goes on inside them, and if you took them apart, you wouldn't understand it, anyway. It's one of the concerns people have around the ethical side of AI is that we can't reverse engineer it anymore. We have no idea what's inside that black box. Hot topics, again, not going to spend too much time on this, and this has all been done to death in the press, but I think pertinent for all of you to have eyes on. Copyright and intellectual property is a big deal, and there are lots of lawsuits from content creators, artists, musicians, as you guys would know about, suing AI companies because the AI has been trained on their content, arguably trained on their content, and is outputting stuff which maybe it wouldn't have output if that person's content didn't exist in the internet. We'll talk about why Copilot is potentially a bit different, but a lot of the AI engines like ChatGPT are using publicly available data, and that's a fact. Loss of jobs, also a very well explored topic, and I've heard various experts talk about this, and now the sort of situation is, and you've got to take it with a grain of salt. Will jobs be lost because of AI? Yes. Same as any other big step in technology or the evolution of industry or whatever. But will new jobs be created? Also yes. Time will tell what the balance is or how the lay of the land looks at the end of this. Fake news, very obvious as well. Also in terms of election rigging and all of the fun stuff we've had in South Africa recently, but also very pertinently in the States, tons and tons of fake news, fake websites, bots that are on Instagram or Facebook responding to posts could be driving a narrative that isn't necessarily true or that has a purpose that wasn't your initial purpose, and it's all being driven by bots. In fact, there's a theory, if you guys have the time to look into it, called the dead internet theory, which is that increasingly a bunch of what we're seeing on social media is not humans, it's bots, it's AI. That's not fake news, that's real news. There's tons and tons of bots you can buy off the shelf right now, which will interact on your company's behalf or on your politician's behalf. And it's going to be very difficult for people to understand who's a human and who's a robot. And then bias. Bias comes in a couple of flavors, but the main one being that bias could be built in by the programmers, the original programmers of these AIs, but also by the content that they're studying. So if you put an AI onto a bulletin board that is being used by bad people, you're going to have a bad bot. If you do it on something harmless like flower arranging, it's going to be biased towards flower arranging. It's still a machine at the end of the day. But there's another form of bias which Brian's going to talk about very briefly, which is that there are deliberate steps that the AI manufacturers are using to prevent it on a per conversation basis. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you. So we're going to kick off the live demos. We know that this is not what you should do because live demos always go to hell. So we're going to do our best to trust the AI will do a good job of it. But just before we jump into that, we're going to talk a little bit about prompt engineering, because certainly from our experience, we found that this is far more important than a lot of companies are making it out to be. Like, your ability to interact with these AI platforms has got a lot to do with your prompt engineering. We will share this presentation with you all afterwards, so you'll have access to this. This is probably the best one that we've come across. It's verified by Microsoft. It talks about the way to structure it to get the best outcome, and that really and very broadly talks to the task. So the instruction of what you want it to perform, context, so any variables and any descriptions around the data that you're using, any context that you want to add to it, your expectations, so conveying the goal and the outcome that you want, and then output, so any kind of format that you wanted to generate. And typically, if you enter a prompt as task, context, expectation, output in whatever way you need to, that it typically ends up in a very, very accurate result, for your output. One of the other things, just briefly, that is very impressive is that you can also use what's called chain of thought. So chain of thought is really going, I want you to first do this, then I want you to do that, and then I want you to put it in this kind of breakdown and include these elements based on a review somewhere. That kind of train of thought, it is very, very accurate and competent at being able to work with. So I'm going to pop out of that into my normal screen. And we're going to jump into the demos quickly. So I am going to hop between a couple of different prompts here. So you'll see here is what we call Copilot. Very importantly, this is the first aspect. When you just have normal Copilot, that Copilot for Bing that I was talking about, this work and web won't be there. You'll be in web permanently. And that's very much like ChatGPT. You can prompt stuff over here in creative, balanced, or precise, and it'll give you answers to whatever you want. The work one is the integrated solution. So when you select that, it blocks out the outside world, and it is obviously linked into your tenant, and it will only search and understand what is happening inside your tenant. It'll ignore the rest of the world. So that's very importantly, both of them carry this tab over here, which talks about the protection of your commercial data. When you use your data in the Microsoft tenant under Copilot, it is protected. It doesn't go anywhere. Not even Microsoft themselves get access to it. The AI get momentary access to it, use it for what your output is, and then they release it. So that is a very important aspect of obviously keeping control of your data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a document, which is a document that I wrote, the Turrito sales compensation. I'm going to drop that in, and I'm going to prompt it to say, I wanted to read it. And so you can see here, read the document and prepare a 10-point quiz on the contents to test someone's knowledge on the document. So in practical use, we use this all the time in our business to be able to prepare tests or information or quizzes or new starts to see how they've learned in different areas of the business. And effectively, regardless of whether you're putting it inside Copilot or inside ChatGPT, the AI's ability to generate unbelievably accurate information and questions and data is incredible. So it spits out, I wrote this document, so these are extremely relevant questions. You can also ask it to do something like change to a multiple choice test. And obviously, I don't need to repeat any of the information. Like that thing that you just did now, please, it understands context, it understands what we're talking about. So it'll just change it and then obviously do a multiple choice question on it. So very powerful from that aspect. While that's spitting out the information, I'm going to quickly chop to ChatGPT just to give you an idea of the differences. Again, these AI platforms, for the most part, they sit very parallel. Some of them jump ahead a little bit and other ones will jump ahead later. But for the most part, they can all pretty much do the same thing. So now I'm going to drop in some interesting stuff around capture tests. So I'll drop this capture test inside there. I don't need to ask ChatGPT because it actually says over there, there's no text, it's just image, but select the images with bicycles. It says, gets it right every single time. Top row, first image, middle row, second image, bottom row, third image. There are the bicycles, there aren't any others. It is extremely accurate at this stuff. And to the point where I'm going to drop in the famed most used. I'll make that a little bit bigger if I can. This is the most incorrectly chosen capture in the world by humans. So this one is, whoops, I've dropped in the same one. I think it's this one here. So this is traffic lights, and it is the most incorrectly answered capture by humans. So it always asks, as a human, there's a traffic light, there's a traffic light, there's a traffic light. It always finds 4. The other one is actually there. And if you zoom into the image, there is actually a very small traffic light from the United States hanging on one of those screen pylons. Now, this capture, they actually had to edit it for humans because humans kept getting it wrong, saying that there was only 3. And then they found that the AIs would always find the 4th one, which is the middle row along that 3rd image over there. I'm going to quickly tell you why these captures are so important, because ultimately it's the context of whatever you throw at these machines. So as an example, this is to me, I was sent this and I didn't even know what it was. And I doubt that anyone in the room would know what it was. So it's that kind of thing that you can just drop into any of the generative AI platforms. You don't have to ask it anything. It knows what you're looking for. It knows that this is potentially confusing, and it'll literally look at it and give you a full breakdown of exactly what you're looking at. So this is an image depicting the various machine learning and neural network concepts. It contains diagrams and visuals, and then you can ask it anything you want about it. So it knows exactly what these things are, right down to you can drop in news clipping articles and saying to it, I'd like you to please transcribe that word for word, because again, it's an image. The AI's ability to be able to read that tiny text and translate it word for word into exactly what the transcript is, unbelievable capability. So this is child's play for the AI platforms at the moment. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're using Google's Gemini or Microsoft solutions or ChatGPT, any of those platforms are very capably able to deliver this kind of outcome to you as well. I am quickly going to hop over to my email. This is part of the integration stuff. So this is some of the most commonly used by us when we deployed this technology. This is an incredible way to look at long email threads back and forth, lots of context. You certainly don't want to spend 20 minutes reading it, and you can just hit the summary button and it'll tell you exactly what the summary is. So all the context, there was an issue, this person solved that, they apologized for the inconvenience, and they said that they were taking care of it. You know that it's done, you know that it's sorted. It takes 30 seconds to get that kind of context, and you can step away and carry on. Another usage for it, if you get, this isn't actually an unhappy customer, it's just me sending it to me. Hopefully we don't have unhappy customers. But when you're responding to emails like that, you can literally say, I want you to draft, I'll do something horrible. I'll say, respond in a very sarcastic and firm manner. And when I ask it to generate, it'll generate that response. Dear John, thank you for expressing your concern. I'm sure the problem isn't you or your computer skills. It must be us. So very sarcastic. I'll make sure that you get credit for the past 4 years and cancel your contract. Just make sure you return any software and equipment you receive. So not the kind of response that you want to get, but again, you can retry it and say, well, can you actually generate one that is, you reply again, I'd like you to generate one that is kind and sincere and solves the problem for the customer. And again, it'll generate. And we're actually using this live with some of our staff who historically they might be very strong at accounting or whatever their role is, but they battle to respond to customers in a certain way using this tool to be able to respond to that. I'm very quickly going to cut over to Colin so that he can do his demo. So over to you, Colin.
Thanks. And guys, we are running out of time. So again, if you are under time pressure, feel free to jump off. We're not going to hold it against you. It's our fault for running late, despite our best efforts. I'm going to share my screen. One second.
AI haven't solved this issue yet.
No, I know. And also the fact that it's on a different desktop. There you go. Can you see that?
Yeah, we got it.
So I'm using the internal Copilot that Brian was talking about, the one from Microsoft 365. Something that it is good for, which I'm going to show you now, is internal questions. We, again, are using this actively in our own business. But if someone wants to know, for instance, how long must Turrito store data in terms of its data retention policy, let's say you're an engineer or you're someone in charge of SharePoint, you don't need to go and find the library, find the policy document, figure out which is the latest one, and then go through a 20-page document to see what our data retention policy is. You can just ask a question in English, and it'll answer it 8 times out of 10. It's correct. The reason I say that is you do always need to check these things to some extent. And here we go. That's the data retention policy. There isn't a clear answer, but we adhere to POPI and SARS regulations. But the actual whole policy is linked. That's also difficult sometimes to find stuff in SharePoint, as I'm sure as many of you have discovered. You can ask these questions in English and it'll give it to you, again, constrained, restrained within your own environment. I'm going to do a little bit of an interesting demo, which was inspired by a customer of ours who is in the baking industry. And that we saw recently, and I'm going to ask Copilot to come up with names for a rye bakery. My prompt engineering here is not great. You know, as Brian said, you should have a bit more structure there, but let's see what it comes up with. This is the internal Copilot. But it does also have access to historical stuff off of the web, and it can be creative, as you can see here. And this is also a perfect example. When I asked this exact question earlier today, it gave me 5, and now it's given me 10. But they're brilliant. Rye Revival. Let's say that we like Rye Revival. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go into Word. Oops, there you go. There's the demo fault. Oh, how is that possible? I'm going to open Copilot. And here I'll say, create a business plan for a rye bakery called Rye Revival. This is Word Online, as you guys would have noticed. You can use the apps, but we found that using the online browser-based apps is much better with Copilot. By the way, what you're seeing is the tab on the right-hand side is the Copilot tab. When you have Copilot for 365 integrated with your tenant, it always appears as a tab on the right-hand side. And it's for you. It's a license that's dedicated to me, and no one else can see it. So in other words, if I'm in a Teams meeting, I can ask the bot, so I can ask Copilot about stuff that's happening in the Teams meeting, and that's just between me and Copilot. The other people in the meeting don't see that. So here's the business plan for Rye Bakery called Rye Revival. And I am going to copy and all of the relevant stuff there. I'm going to paste it into the document. And, you know, I'm taking this stuff for granted. I'm sure you guys have seen this type of stuff. It's very basic on Chat, and ChatGPT could do exactly the same thing. But there's my very quick business plan for creating a new bakery for rye bread. Now what I'm going to do is save it. Bakery plan. I'm going to go to PowerPoint and open a blank presentation. And I'm going to create a presentation from the file that I just made there. Again, here's the tab on the right-hand side. Why was it? Let's see if that's the right one. And it'll turn my business presentation, my business plan into a presentation with graphics.
Hopefully.
And as you know, I think the point that we're like making here is you know, some of the stuff is not, when you buy a Copilot for 365 license, it covers all of these apps. You might not use them. Like I actually very rarely make presentations, but for someone who does make presentations on a regular basis, this stuff is unbelievable. And there you have it. Inserting graphics, inserting a table of contents. It even does speaker notes if you look down at the bottom. So it's actually creating unique content there that I can talk about, which the people that I'm presenting to wouldn't see. Even more incredible is if I'm not happy with this layout, and by the way, I mean, like I said, I'm taking this stuff for granted, but I still think it's pretty amazing that Copilot can make a business plan and a presentation with the correct types of graphics in 3 minutes. But let's say I'm not happy with this layout. I can use the Copilot Designer tool and change the graphics or the layout. So, you know, for someone who does presentations, this stuff is, you can edit this and you can still tweak it, but this is massively time saving. And obviously it's content aware, so it's choosing the right types of graphics. I am gonna hand back to Brian because of our time constraints. So I hope that was helpful.
Excellent. Thanks, Colin. I think we are going to jump straight into Q&A, guys. So if you do have any questions, please just fire them away and we will do our best to answer. So just raise your virtual hands. I know that we did potentially have some questions coming through in the invites, Mel. So let's see if any questions come through from the room. Feel free to raise your hand or just type in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll fire away. Mel, while we're waiting, are there any questions that came through on the invite?
So I have a question from myself of what when you were chatting with the Copilots, the internal one, it had a 4 out of 30 used with the internal chat.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's one of the problems that they haven't been able to solve with these generative AI models. So Colin referred to it earlier. Context is really important in these models. And what they've found is that if they isolate the engagement with the AI model to a short framework, it doesn't tend to build bias or ideas that it starts going down a rabbit hole on. So they actually limit it to a certain amount of engagement before it'll force you to restart the chat. The restart chat effectively erases everything that you've spoken about, and the AI goes back to its neutral state. What they've found is that if they leave it so that it builds a memory, it starts becoming it starts modifying itself, if I can call it that. So it starts, saying, in this short amount of time that I've engaged with Melissa, she really likes talking about these things. So I'm going to base everything on that, and it becomes bias in that sense. So the way that they've worked around it is they actually reforce you to start that engagement from scratch, and then you can give whatever context you want, and it'll engage with you perfectly. There are probably more than a few hundred startups around the world who are trying to solve the memory retention problem on AI models, and that's purely around that. It's something that they're desperate to solve because technically they're only unlocking a small amount of potential that the AI can deliver. Once they solve the memory problem, it's obviously going to open up a hell of a lot more. Excellent. Any other questions from the floor? Raise your virtual hand.
Michael's got a question. As I mentioned, when I asked that exact same query this morning, and I probably worded it slightly differently because I typed it from scratch instead of copying and pasting. One time it gave me 5 responses, another time it gave me 10 responses. That's exactly what Brian's talking about right now. Is it's doing it from scratch every single time. If it remembered all of your chats with it all of the time, it starts to be a Brian bot or a Colin bot, and that's not something that any of the AI engines want. They want a generic neutral bot that has guardrails and that does things or answers questions objectively. So it's basically doing it from scratch every single time, Michael.
There's also an expansion on that, Michael, which is, and everyone's heard about hallucination, and it is a very real thing with artificial intelligence sometimes. And I mean, it's why it's actually quite fun to do live demos with artificial intelligence, because you genuinely do not know what it's going to do. Like, there is no pre-thought, there is no pre-configuration. Like, it'll do what it wants to do. And the reality is sometimes it'll look at content and literally decide of its own volition that there is insufficient content to give you 5, or sorry, to give you 10. So it will decide to give you 5. And it's literally making a decision in that moment going, I don't think there's enough interesting content here. I'm going to give you 5, even though you asked for 10. And it's such a strange thing. They link that to the hallucination where they're going, we don't know why. Sometimes it's logical. And I think the example I gave was logical. Sometimes it's entirely illogical. It's like a petulant child who just goes, no, I'm going to give you what I want, and kind of throw that away. So it is interesting. I mean, we are at the very early foundational levels of this stuff. I mean, it is incredibly powerful, but there is no question that what we are demonstrating today, we will not repeat the same kind of demonstration in a month from now, because in a month, a lot of the stuff that we're showing now is going to be so rudimentary and so basic, and there's going to be a lot more exciting stuff to show. So it really is moving very quickly. I see another question there from Kevin. So what's the best way to provide the training data to a data lake? What's the route to control what it accesses? Colin, do you want to jump on that one?
Yeah. So it doesn't matter too much, Kevin. You can put this onto, and look, Copilot, the Copilot we've been showing you is fairly basic in the sense that it looks at your tenant and SharePoint and OneDrive and emails and things like that. There are versions of Copilot, and there are people in this room that can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Microsoft currently has or is working on 18 different versions of Copilot, or different types of Copilot. Some of them are for structured data, some of them are for data lakes, some of them are for old databases that no one can work with anymore. But ultimately all of them are controlled or interacted with using natural language, and all of them are based on the same LLM generative AI engines. And if your database, for instance, structured database, is set up correctly, you don't even need to train it. In other words, if your field names are correctly named, first name, last name, street address, postal code, you can give it a database and say, give me all of the people whose first names start with B, and it'll do that. If your database is set up incorrectly or the field names are funny, then you'll need to do further training and tell AI, listen, our first name field is called XYZ, our street address field is called ABC, and then it'll still figure it out, but you need to do a bit more training. The training is quite incredible. We've used a couple of the more advanced Copilot AIs, as well as some chatbots that are available online. And the training is literally also in natural language. You can tell, for instance, a chatbot to look at a database, you point it at the database, or you drag and drop a spreadsheet or a database into it, and you say, you're allowed to answer anything about this database, but please do it in a formal tone, don't be rude, and always finish every answer with, may I help you with anything further? You're speaking to it in natural language. So all of the script writing and advanced understanding of databases becomes much easier, or irrelevant potentially in the future. I hope that answers your question, Kevin.
And very importantly as well, I mean, the data that you provide, and I suppose that's at the core of the question that you're asking, is that it is very important, the relevance of the data that you place inside of there, because these models, once you train them on data, they have to assume that what they're being trained on is accurate. So if that information is inaccurate, if the information is biased, if the information is flawed in those ways, the model will learn from it and will behave in that manner as well. So it obviously is critically important, the accuracy and relevance of the data that you're training it on. Excellent. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. No, there we go. Vimpy, so as an example you provided at the beginning of the session, where financial data was accessible to the system analyst, can you determine on a granular level who can view or request information? Absolutely, you can, Vimpy. I mean, typically you can do it at the broad level on the tenant, so who has access to what folders, information, the level of data that sits inside the environment, right down to individual documents, individual views, individual images, individual databases, individual data sets. So it really can get extremely granular in terms of its control, and it honors those breakdowns of permissions extremely well. You can also, to some extent, and this is some of the stuff that's coming out more from Microsoft Studio, so the more custom-based, where you can actually start controlling the level of permission access on context. So on areas of information where even if it's broadly accessible, the information contained within documents, the AI itself goes, I'm not too sure whether this is relevant or not. And you can set up processes where it will inform management teams to say, someone is asking for access to this document, there's broad access to it, but we need you to verify that it's okay for them to see it. So you can actually do a lot of process integration with access to information at a very granular level. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. So, all of the stuff that you can do in a Microsoft tenant, which previously, had to do with compliance and good governance, and people like myself always sort of cringe a little bit because it's a lot of work and it can be quite boring. Before AI, it was a box you had to tick, and it is important. After AI, it's crucial. You absolutely have to have this stuff in place. So one of the Turrito group companies, Argantic, there's a couple of people from Argantic in the room now. That was a big part of their business, is setting the scene and setting the platform up in the right way, so that the right people had access to the right data, that it was tagged, that it was reportable on if in case of a breach, adhering to the best practice in terms of POPI or GDPR, et cetera, et cetera. If that's set up properly, it's going to help enormously. It helps completely. But as Brian's saying, there is an element in addition to that, which was never possible before, and that's the context-aware stuff. And I'll give you a very real example, which I saw recently, which is that let's say you give a Copilot license to someone, and they're given access to the whole of SharePoint, which should not be possible, but let's say it's done by accident. You can stipulate, not with Copilot out of the box, but with something like Studio, that under no circumstances can anyone in the business see what you define as personal information, and then you can define personal information as credit card numbers, ID numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So then, even though that person has access to the whole of SharePoint, if they say, can I have Brian Timperley's ID number, the AI is going to know, well, I know that Mary has access to the whole of SharePoint and Brian Timperley's ID number is in SharePoint, but I've been told that's personal information, therefore I'm not going to share that information with her. So we've also seen very real examples of this by accident. And Brian, as an example, has the permissions to see everything in SharePoint. When Copilot first came out, he did an experiment and asked to see one of our partners' emails, and it gave it to him. It showed him all his emails. When Brian did it the other day, Copilot said, I don't think you should see this information, like, please speak to your system administrator. So he still has permission, but Copilot now has the sense to say, listen, I think that's a bit sensitive or personal. I'm not going to give you the information. Right.
Any other questions, guys? And if not, then we will definitely be sending a copy of this presentation to everyone who joined. Thank you all once again. It's been great, albeit very brief, and sorry we had to rush through that, but I see that the majority of you actually managed to stick around, so that's wonderful. Thank you. And we look forward to hosting you at the next Bits and Bytes or Lunch and Learn. Thanks very much, and we will chat to you soon. Take care. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good day.